The fire flickers in a dark cave, shadows dancing on the stone walls. A group of Neanderthals huddle together, their heavy brows casting deep silhouettes as the icy wind howls outside. They were survivors, hunters, thinkers, yet within a few thousand years, their kind would vanish forever. No battles were recorded. No mass graves tell the full story. And yet, one of the most resilient species to ever walk the earth disappeared as if swallowed by time itself. Was it disease, climate, a clash with our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, or something far more unsettling? Tonight, we unravel the chilling mystery behind their extinction, a mystery that still whispers through our DNA. And it all begins with Chapter 1, when Neanderthals thrived at the edge of survival. The world of the Neanderthals was one of extremes. Imagine standing at the edge of a frozen steppe, where winds cut like knives and the horizon stretches endlessly into a white void. It was here, some 200,000 years ago, that Neanderthals carved out their existence. They weren't primitive brutes as often portrayed, far from it. These people crafted tools from stone and bone with astonishing precision, built shelters against the bitter cold, and even tamed fire to keep their fragile communities alive. Their lives revolved around survival. Mammoth hunts were perilous but necessary, requiring coordination, strategy, and courage. Around the firelight they shared food, warmth, and perhaps even stories, early sparks of culture that echo faintly in us today. Archaeological sites reveal pigments that may have been used for body decoration, and burial sites suggest rituals, maybe even a belief in something beyond death. In every sense, they were human, just a different kind. And yet, as we peer into their world, shadows creep at the edges. Life expectancy was short. Injuries were common and brutal. Their populations never reached great numbers, leaving them vulnerable to sudden shifts in climate or disease. Unlike our species, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals lacked the sprawling trade networks that could carry food, ideas, and survival strategies across vast distances. For tens of thousands of years, though, they endured, weathering the ice and the fire of an unforgiving earth. But the resilience that once sustained them may not have been enough to face the storm that was quietly brewing on the horizon. Because survival in the Ice Age was only the beginning of their story. The real test would come when another kind of human arrived us. As the Ice Age deepened, the Neanderthals adapted in ways that seem almost superhuman. Their bodies were built for survival. Short, stocky frames retained heat, while powerful muscles made them formidable hunters. In the caves of Europe and the Middle East, they left behind a record of innovation. Stone flakes sharp enough to butcher massive beasts, spears thrust with lethal force, and even early adhesives binding tools together. These were not the crude imitations of survival, but deliberate acts of intelligence. And still, their world was fragile. Unlike Homo sapiens in Africa who exchanged ideas and tools across vast regions, Neanderthal groups were isolated. Each small band lived and died in relative solitude, with little connection beyond their immediate landscape. When famine struck or a disease spread, there were no lifelines from distant allies, no safety net of larger networks. Their resilience was local, but their vulnerabilities were global. Yet there was something hauntingly human in their existence. Fossils show evidence of broken bones that healed, a sign that someone cared for the injured, that compassion was not foreign to them. Some skeletons suggest arthritis or disabilities, but those individuals lived long past the point where they could hunt, meaning they were protected and sustained by others. This was not just survival, it was community. And in those communities there was culture. Traces of ochre pigments hint at body painting or symbolic art. Simple flutes carved from bird bones suggest music, perhaps a primitive rhythm echoing against stone walls in fire-lit caves. Neanderthals were not silent shadows. They were voices in the dark, trying to make sense of a brutal world. But even as they thrived in their own way, something ominous stirred far to the south. A new kind of human was moving steadily northward, taller, leaner, armed not just with tools but with ideas, alliances, and numbers. For the Neanderthals, the Ice Age was survivable. What came next would be far more dangerous. For thousands of years, Neanderthals had been the masters of their frozen kingdoms. But history rarely spares one species for long. From the plains of Africa, Another kind of human had begun its slow, unstoppable spread, our ancestors, Homo sapiens. At first, the encounters may have been rare, fleeting glimpses across the wilderness. A Neanderthal hunting party, silent in the snow, might have watched unfamiliar figures moving with speed and precision. These newcomers were different, slighter in build, but with tools that seemed refined in a way the Neanderthals had never seen. More importantly, they traveled in larger groups, bound together by shared language, trade, and culture. Where Neanderthal survival was local, Homo sapiens survival was global. The landscape began to change. In regions where both species crossed paths, evidence suggests a subtle but undeniable shift. Neanderthals retreating from prime hunting grounds, sapiens expanding into territories once thought unassailable. It wasn't always violent, but it was relentless. Every new settlement of sapiens meant fewer resources for Neanderthals, fewer chances to recover from famine or harsh winters. And yet there is another side to the story. Genetic evidence reveals something far more intimate. These two humans didn't only compete, they connected. Interbreeding occurred, leaving behind fragments of Neanderthal DNA that still echo in our bodies today. For all the tension, there must have been moments of contact, shared fires, exchanged glances, even families formed across species lines. But these encounters carried consequences. Along with shared genes came the possibility of shared diseases, pathogens that one species carried and the other had no defense against. For a population already fragile, such infections could devastate entire communities. The Neanderthals had survived ice, fire, and famine, but the arrival of this new rival marked the beginning of their true test, a slow, creeping battle for existence. And as Chapter 2 will reveal, the end would not come with a single blow, but with a shadow that grew darker and darker until nothing remained. By the time Homo sapiens had firmly entered Europe, the Neanderthals were already cornered. Their populations, never large to begin with, had dwindled to scattered pockets. Archaeological layers show fewer tools, fewer hearths, fewer signs of life. It was as though the world itself had begun to erase them. Climate shifts struck with brutal force. Glaciers advanced, forests thinned, and prey animals migrated or disappeared. For a species dependent on large game like mammoths, reindeer, and bison, the shrinking food supply was catastrophic. Where Homo sapiens could adapt, shifting to smaller prey, inventing traps, or sharing resources across networks, Neanderthals were bound to the rhythms of their immediate environment. When the animals left, hunger followed. And then came competition. Even without open conflict, sapiens altered the balance of survival. They occupied caves, spread across fertile valleys, and harvested resources at a scale Neanderthals could not match. Each encounter, whether hostile or not, tilted the odds further away from the Neanderthals. But there is a more unsettling possibility. Some researchers suggest that sapiens weren't just competitors, they may have been predators. A few scattered sites hint at violent clashes, shattered skulls and broken bones suggesting encounters that ended in blood. If true, Neanderthals were not merely displaced, they were hunted, systematically pushed out until their numbers collapsed beyond recovery. Yet violence alone cannot explain the complete disappearance. Something else must have lingered in the shadows. Interbreeding left genetic traces in us, but it may also have brought hidden costs. A deadly disease, harmless to sapiens but lethal to Neanderthals, could have swept through isolated groups like wildfire. With no immunity, their already fragile bands might have been wiped out in silence. No armies, no wars, only fever and death. The world was closing in, and the Neanderthals had fewer and fewer places left to stand. Imagine a Neanderthal camp in its final days. The fire still burns, but fewer voices murmur around it. A cough lingers in the cold air. An elder lies weak in the corner, children restless and pale. There are no signs of battle, no predators stalking nearby, only sickness that spreads with terrifying speed. This is one of the most haunting theories of their extinction. Interbreeding with Homo sapiens left fragments of Neanderthal DNA within us, but it may have carried a hidden curse, pathogens. Diseases that sapiens had long adapted to could have torn through Neanderthal groups with no mercy. With populations so small and isolated, one outbreak might erase entire clans overnight. No graveyards tell the tale, no written words describe it, just a silence that archaeology can barely touch. But disease was not the only shadow. There is evidence that Homo sapiens, whether intentionally or through sheer dominance, erased Neanderthal culture itself. When sapiens arrived, they brought with them complex languages, symbolic art, and expansive networks of trade. Neanderthals, with their smaller, scattered communities, could not match that cultural flood. Slowly, their way of life vanished, not only their bodies but their identity. It was as if they were absorbed into us, their echoes lingering in our DNA, but their voices lost to time. And yet, perhaps the eeriest possibility of all is that there was no single cause. Climate collapse, competition, disease, violence, and interbreeding may have worked together in a slow, tightening spiral. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together, they formed a perfect storm, a creeping erasure that left no single moment of extinction, only a gradual fading. By 40,000 years ago, the caves that once glowed with Neanderthal firelight stood empty. The hunters, the caretakers, the voices in the dark gone. Only their shadows remained, etched faintly into us. If you think the Neanderthals are gone, think again. Every time you glance in the mirror, their story flickers faintly back. Genetic studies reveal that almost every human alive today outside of Africa carries between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. In some populations, it's even higher. Their extinction wasn't absolute. It was emerging, a haunting presence woven into the fabric of who we are. That DNA influences more than you might expect. Traits linked to skin tone, immune response, even the way some of us react to altitude or the cold can be traced back to Neanderthals. In a strange way, their survival strategy became part of ours, but this inheritance is also unsettling. Some genetic fragments are associated with depression, addiction, and autoimmune disorders, echoes of vulnerabilities from a species long gone. It's as though their struggles never truly died, but were carried forward in us. This raises a disturbing question. Did Homo sapiens really defeat the Neanderthals, or did we absorb them? Were they erased by violence, disease, and climate, or did they simply dissolve into us, their firelight dimming until it was indistinguishable from our own? When you stand in a forest at night, when the cold bites your skin, when you feel fear prickle at the edge of silence, you carry a shadow of them with you. They are not just fossils in museums, not just bones in the dirt. They are ghosts in our blood, reminders that extinction isn't always clean or final. Sometimes it lingers, breathing quietly through the living. The Neanderthals may have vanished, but their story didn't end. It became ours. And perhaps the creepiest truth of all is this: when we search for them, we are really searching for ourselves. The disappearance of the Neanderthals is not just a prehistoric riddle, it's a mirror held up to our own fragile existence. They were survivors of fire and ice, caretakers of their wounded, makers of art and music. For nearly 200,000 years, they endured what most species could never face. And yet, in the end, they slipped into silence, not with a cataclysmic end, but with a gradual fading, like embers cooling in a forgotten fire. But they are not truly gone. Their traces live in our bodies, their struggles ripple through our genetics, and their memory haunts the caves, tools, and bones they left behind. The creepy truth is that their extinction wasn't final. It was a blending, a slow erasure, and a warning. Because one day, perhaps far in the future, our species might face its own test. And if we vanish, will we too live on only as fragments, whispers in the blood of those who come after us? If this story made you think differently about our ancient cousins, take a moment to reflect. What do you carry from them? What does their survival and their end say about our own future? And if you want to keep exploring the mysteries that shape who we are, consider subscribing. There are many more forgotten fires to uncover, and together we'll bring them back to light.